Bones breaking under sudden pressure sound exactly like a thick branch of dry celery snapping in half. Most civilized species on Orbital Station Delta had never encountered that horrifying noise before Tuesday. They certainly never expected a quiet, unassuming human girl to be the one orchestrating the brutal symphony. Sarah Jenkins was not a soldier, a mercenary, or a galactic enforcer. She was a junior structural engineer from Denver, Colorado, deployed to the Outer Rim by the recently expanded interstellar division of Lockheed Martin. Sitting in the crowded, neon-lit mess hall of the trading hub, she looked exactly like what she was, an exhausted 24-year-old desperately trying to enjoy a 30-minute lunch break. She wore a faded brown Carhartt jacket over a standard-issue jumpsuit, chewed absent-mindedly on the end of a stylus, and occasionally took small sips of black coffee from a battered, sticker-covered Stanley thermos. To the rest of the galaxy, Sarah was a fragile anomaly. When humanity finally breached the faster-than-light barrier and introduced themselves to the Galactic Federation, our leaders made a highly classified, unanimous decision. They lied. The Federation was a sprawling bureaucracy that categorized planets by their lethality. Class 1 worlds were peaceful, low-gravity paradises. Class 10 worlds were nightmarish hellscapes of extreme gravity, predatory flora, and toxic atmospheres. If a species originated from anything above a Class 8, the Federation immediately drafted them into the Vanguard, a meat-grinder military force used to fight proxy wars on hostile frontiers. Earth, with its crushing gravity, shifting tectonic plates, hyper-aggressive microorganisms, and unpredictable weather systems, was a textbook Class 11 Deathworld. But humanity wanted to trade, not bleed, for alien overlords. So United Nations diplomats hacked their own biological and planetary data, officially registering Earth as a peaceful Class 3 garden world. They claimed human bone density was a result of genetic manipulation, and that our aggressive immune systems were just flukes of a sterile environment. For 3 years, the lie held perfectly. Humans were viewed as delicate, intelligent artisans and engineers. We were the galaxy's nerds. That illusion was exactly what brought Hunter to Sarah's table. Hunter was not his real name. His native tongue consisted of subsonic clicks that human vocal cords couldn't replicate, so he had arbitrarily chosen a Western moniker from an Earth database, believing it sounded predatory. He belonged to a dominant species, known as the Vrox, towering bipedal creatures, with thick reptilian scales, 4 muscular arms, and a society built entirely on a strict caste system of physical dominance. Standing roughly 7.5 feet tall, Hunter was a regional enforcer for the station's corrupt docking authority. He was used to taking what he wanted, and he violently despised the new, frail humans who were suddenly securing lucrative repair contracts that previously belonged to his clan. Sarah didn't even look up from her datapad when Hunter's massive shadow fell over her small table, completely blocking the harsh artificial light of the overhead fixtures. The mess hall, usually a chaotic blend of 100 different languages, clinking metal and alien music, began to fall into a heavy, suffocating silence. Across the room, Aidan, a senior logistics coordinator from Earth, stiffened his hand, slowly reaching for the emergency comms unit on his belt. The other alien species in the room, ranging from the avian Rilari to the gelatinous Omo, shrank back into their booths, terrified of catching the Vrox enforcer's attention. "You are occupying my designated space, garden dweller." Hunter growled his translator collar, rendering his deep, guttural hisses into perfect, menacing English. Sarah finished reading a paragraph on her screen, blinked tiredly, and gently tapped the screen to save her progress. Only then did she look up. Her expression was entirely devoid of fear. Instead, she looked mildly annoyed, the way a person might look if they realized they had stepped in a puddle wearing fresh socks. The seating here is unassigned, Sarah said softly, her voice steady and calm. There are at least 40 empty tables in the western quadrant. Take your pick. Hunter's dual sets of nostrils flared a puff of warm, sulfur-scented air hitting Sarah's face. In Vrock's culture, a smaller, weaker creature defying a superior was not just an insult. It was a physical challenge that demanded immediate violent correction. He slammed his 2 lower hands down on the metal table. The impact dented the cheap alloy and sent Sarah's datapad skittering toward the edge. I did not ask for a demographic layout of the room. Hunter snarled, leaning closer until his scaly, angular face was mere inches from hers. I told you to move. Your species is weak. You are soft, pathetic little scavengers stealing our credits. If you do not gather your primitive belongings and vacate this seat, I will physically throw you into the disposal chute. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't gasp. She simply reached out, stabilized her datapad, and picked up her Stanley thermos. She unscrewed the lid, letting the faint steam of the coffee rise into the air. I've been pulling double shifts for 2 weeks, trying to fix the primary atmospheric scrubbers your people installed backward, Sarah replied, her tone conversational, completely ignoring the massive threat looming over her. My feet hurt. My head aches. And I have exactly 12 minutes left to finish this coffee before I have to go back to Sector 4. I am not moving. A collective gasp echoed from the avian aliens sitting 2 tables over. Aidan was practically vibrating with anxiety, whispering frantically into his comms unit. Hunter let out a sharp, barking laugh that sounded like rocks grinding together in a blender. You garden dwellers possess an arrogance that heavily outweighs your frail biology. I am going to peel the skin from your skull and use it as a warning to the rest of your pathetic... Hunter. Sarah interrupted, finally locking eyes with him. Her brown eyes were completely deadpan void of the adrenaline-fueled panic that normally accompanied a predator-prey interaction. I'm going to give you one chance to walk away. Just turn around. Go bully a vending machine. Because if you touch me, I'm going to hurt you. The sheer absurdity of the statement momentarily paralyzed the Vrock's enforcer. He stared at her, his 4 eyes blinking in unsynchronized confusion. This human stood barely 5 feet 4 inches tall. She weighed perhaps 130 pounds. Hunter weighed close to 400 pounds of pure scaled muscle. He had crushed armored carapace with his bare hands. The idea that this squishy pink mammal could hurt him was a mathematical impossibility in his mind. What Hunter and the rest of the Galactic Federation didn't know was the fundamental truth about gravity evolution and biomechanics. The Vrocks evolved on a planet with 0.4 G relative to Earth. They grew tall, massive, and intimidating, but their bone structure was highly porous, resembling the internal structure of a bird's beak. Their muscles were designed for explosive movement in low-resistance environments, but lacked dense, fast-twitch fibers. Their thick scales were great against glancing blows, but offered zero protection against deep, kinetic, blunt force. Humans, on the other hand, evolved at the bottom of a crushing gravity well. To survive 1.0 G, human bones evolved to be incredibly dense, essentially rods of calcium and phosphorus, wrapped in highly compressed, hyper-efficient muscle tissue. Furthermore, the human nervous system was equipped with a terrifying biological override known as adrenaline, a chemical cocktail that could temporarily push their already dense muscular structures past their safe limits, turning ordinary people into terrifying kinetic engines capable of lifting vehicles off pinned children. Hunter didn't know any of this. He just saw a fragile little girl who needed to be broken. You have sealed your fate, soft thing, Hunter hissed. With blinding speed by galactic standards, but agonizingly slow by Earth standards, Hunter reached out with his upper right arm. His thick, clawed hand clamped down on Sarah's shoulder. his grip intending to crush her collarbone instantly. He squeezed. Nothing happened. Hunter frowned, squeezing harder, expecting the satisfying crunch of brittle calcium. Instead, he felt what seemed to be solid iron, hidden beneath the cheap fabric of her Carhartt jacket. Sarah didn't cry out. She didn't even drop her thermos. She just let out a long, heavy sigh, the sound of someone who was profoundly tired of dealing with stupid people. "I warned you," Sarah whispered. In a fraction of a second, the quiet, exhausted engineer vanished, replaced by an apex predator, forged in the crucible of a Class 11 Deathworld. Sarah dropped her coffee. Before the metal thermos even hit the floor, her left hand shot up her fingers, clamping like a steel vice around Hunter's thick wrist. The Vrox's eyes widened in sudden, absolute terror as he felt the sheer, impossible, crushing force of the human's grip. He tried to pull his arm back, but it was like trying to pull his limb out from under a falling boulder. He was entirely immobilized. "Let go of me!" Hunter roared, genuine panic bleeding into his translator for the first time. He swung his lower left arm in a wide arc, aiming a closed fist directly at Sarah's ribs. Sarah didn't dodge. She stepped into the blow. The alien's fist connected with her side, striking her lower ribs. To anyone watching it looked like a devastating strike, but to Sarah it felt like being punched by a motivated 10-year-old. The impact barely shifted her center of mass. Using the momentum of his own failed punch, Sarah pivoted on her heel. She twisted Hunter's trapped arm outward, applying brutal, calculated torsion to his elbow joint. A sickening pop echoed through the silent mess hall as the Vrox's primary joint hyperextended backward, tearing the delicate ligaments native to a low-gravity biology. Hunter shrieked, a high-pitched, warbling sound of agony dropping to his knees to follow the pressure she was applying to his arm. But Sarah wasn't finished. Adrenaline was flooding her system now, a cold, icy clarity washing over her mind. This creature had threatened her life. On Earth, survival instinct dictated that you neutralize a threat permanently. As Hunter fell to his knees, bringing his head level with her chest, Sarah released his broken arm. In one fluid, seamless motion, she stepped forward and locked both her arms around his thick, scaled neck. To the alien onlookers, it was an impossible scene. The tiny human had just casually broken a Vrox enforcer's arm and was now holding his head in a grapple. Hunter panicked. He thrashed violently, his remaining 3 arms clawing blindly at her jacket, but he couldn't find purchase. He tried to stand to use his massive legs to lift her, but Sarah dropped her weight, rooting her feet to the floor. To Hunter, it felt as though she suddenly weighed 1,000 pounds. "I told you," Sarah said, her voice dropping an octave devoid of any empathy, echoing chillingly through the silent room. "I just wanted to drink my coffee." She planted her left foot firmly on the alien's thigh, for leverage, twisted her hips, and violently jerked her arms in opposite directions. Crack! The sound was deafening in the quiet room. It was that dry, horrific sound of snapping celery magnified 100-fold. Hunter's massive body instantly went completely limp. The aggressive thrashing stopped. His arms dropped lifelessly to his sides, and his 4 eyes rolled back into his head. The specialized interlocking vertebrae at the base of his skull, designed to support a heavy head in low gravity, but entirely unequipped for high-torque lateral force, had completely severed under the immense power of a human's core musculature. Sarah let go. The 7-foot-tall, 400-pound alien enforcer crumpled to the metal decking like a discarded sack of flour, his neck bent at a sickening, unnatural angle. He wasn't dead. IROC's biology allowed for extended survival, even with severe nerve damage, but he was permanently paralyzed from the neck down. He would never walk, let alone bully another being ever again. For 10 agonizing seconds, nobody in the mess hall moved. Nobody breathed. The silence was absolute, broken only by the hum of the overhead ventilation fans and the slow pooling of Hunter's blue blood on the floor where he had bitten his own tongue. Sarah stood over the massive body, her chest heaving slightly as her breathing returned to normal. She rolled her shoulders, wincing slightly at the dull ache in her ribs where he had punched her. She looked down at the unconscious giant, then at the spilled coffee spreading across the floor. "Damn it," she muttered under her breath. "That was my last Colombian roast." Calmly, methodically, she reached down and picked up her dented Stanley thermos. She wiped the spilled liquid off the side with her sleeve, placed it back on the table, and sat down in the exact same chair she had occupied 2 minutes prior. She reached into her jacket pocket, pulled out a worn paperback copy of a Stephen King novel, and flipped it open to her bookmarked page. Across the room, Aidan slowly lowered his hand from his comms unit, his mouth hanging open in utter disbelief. The avian aliens were staring at Sarah with a mixture of religious awe and absolute primal terror. The illusion was shattered. The galaxy's greatest lie had just been brutally exposed. Humanity was not a species of delicate, fragile garden dwellers. They were monsters in disguise. Alarms finally shattered the stunned silence of the mess hall, blaring a high-pitched, rhythmic klaxon that signaled a critical medical emergency. Within 3 minutes, Orbital Station Delta's heavily armed security detail flooded the room. They were a tactical unit comprised mostly of Graxians, a highly disciplined militaristic species known for their crowd control tactics. They burst through the pneumatic doors wielding pulse rifles and shock batons, expecting to find a rogue predator or a massive industrial accident. Instead, they found a paralyzed Vrox enforcer, bleeding blue fluid onto the linoleum, and a human engineer meticulously turning the page of a paperback novel. Chaos immediately consumed the sector. Paramedics hovered over Hunter, their diagnostic scanners violently beeping as they failed to comprehend how a blunt force trauma had generated enough torque to sever a Vrox spinal column. 2 Graxian officers, their armor clanking heavily, approached Sarah. Their translator units barked harsh commands, ordering her to place her hands behind her head. Sarah sighed carefully, dog-earing her page. She placed the book on the table, stood up, and casually presented her wrists. She didn't resist when the magnetic cuffs clamped down, even though she could feel that the locking mechanism was designed for a much weaker tensile threshold. She could have snapped the cuffs with a sharp twist of her wrists, but she was already calculating the overtime pay she would lose if she got thrown into maximum security. They hauled her into interrogation room 4, a stark, grey metallic cube illuminated by a harsh, sterile light. For 2 hours she sat alone on a rigid metal stool. Finally, the heavy blast door slid open. 2 figures walked in. The first was the station's chief of security, an alien who had adopted the human name Winston to deal with the influx of Earth corporations. Winston was a tall, mantis-like creature, his exoskeleton gleaming under the lights. The second figure, however, made Sarah sit up a little straighter. It was David Carmichael. David was the senior regional director for Lockheed Martin's off-world operations. He was a ruthless 60-something corporate shark from Chicago who wore immaculately tailored suits and possessed a stare that could freeze boiling water. If David was here, the situation had escalated far beyond a simple station brawl. "Miss Jenkins," David said, his voice smooth and dangerously calm. He didn't look at the alien security chief. His eyes were locked entirely on Sarah. "Do you have any idea how much paperwork you have generated for my legal department in the last 120 minutes? "He swung first, sir," Sarah replied plainly, leaning back slightly. "He threatened to skin my skull. I considered it a hostile workplace environment." Winston, the security chief, slammed his clawed appendage against the metal table. Do not mock this proceeding human. You are a garden worlder, a fragile artisan species. Yet our medical staff confirms that the Vrock's enforcer suffered a catastrophic cervical fracture, a fracture requiring nearly 4,000 pounds of localized kinetic pressure. The Vrock's syndicate is claiming you used an illegal concealed hydraulic weapon. David Carmichael let out a dry, humorless chuckle. He walked over to the table, opened a sleek leather briefcase, and pulled out a heavily encrypted, solid-state drive. "Chief Winston," David said, adjusting his expensive tie, "my employee did not use a weapon. She used her bare hands. And I am afraid that the Galactic Federation has been operating under a deeply flawed, highly classified misconception regarding Earth's biological standing." Winston's mandibles clicked in confusion. "Explain." 3 years ago, the United Nations paid a massive sum to scrub our true planetary data from the Vanguard's drafting algorithms. David explained, his tone shifting into a practiced corporate pitch. "Earth is not a Class 3 garden world. It is a Class 11 death world. Our gravity is crushing. Our atmosphere is a volatile mix of highly reactive oxygen and nitrogen. Our apex predators are so dangerous that early humans had to invent complex projectile weaponry just to survive leaving their caves. Miss Jenkins here," he gestured to Sarah, "is not an artisan. She is an apex predator composed of ultra-dense bone and hypercontractile muscle tissue. And frankly, Chief Winston, if your station authorities do not immediately drop all charges against her, Lockheed Martin will declassify this information publicly." Winston stared at David, then at Sarah. The alien's posture visibly shrank. If you declassify this, the Vanguard will draft your species. You will be sent to the frontline meat grinders." "No," David corrected, a predatory smile creeping onto his face. "If we declassify this, the Vanguard will realize they cannot afford us. Furthermore, every alien species that has spent the last 3 years bullying, extorting, and short-changing human contractors will suddenly realize they have been poking a sleeping bear. We won't be drafted, Winston. We will become the new enforcers." The twist in the room was palpable. Winston realized with sudden, horrifying clarity that the political balance of Orbital Station Delta, and perhaps the entire sector, had just shifted fundamentally. The humans hadn't been hiding because they were weak. They had been hiding because they wanted to make money peacefully. "The Vrock's syndicate will not accept this." Winston hissed a warning edge in his synthetic voice. "Hunter belonged to the Crimson Scale clan. Their leader, Rex, has already sworn a blood oath. He is mobilizing 60 armed enforcers to the human engineering sector as we speak. They intend to massacre your workers in retaliation." Sarah's head snapped up. Her deadpan demeanor vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine, terrifying anger. "My brother works in that sector." David Carmichael simply sighed, closing his briefcase with a sharp click. "Winston, I suggest you dispatch your medical teams to the engineering sector immediately. Not for my people, for the Vrocks." Deep in Sector 4, the human engineering bay looked more like a chaotic construction site than a high-tech galactic facility. Massive plasma welders threw showers of sparks into the air. Heavy lifters imported directly from Caterpillar Inc. in Peoria, Illinois, rumbled loudly over the reinforced decking. Roughly 200 human workers clad in grease-stained coveralls and hard hats were currently replacing the station's primary fusion coils. They were completely unaware that 60 furious, heavily armed Vrock's enforcers were marching down the primary access corridor. Rex, the towering leader of the Crimson Scale clan, led the charge. He was an absolute behemoth, pushing 8 feet tall, his scales painted with aggressive red war stripes. He carried a heavy kinetic repeater, a rifle designed to punch through light armor. He intended to walk into the human sector, execute the first 10 workers he saw, and demand the immediate surrender of the girl who had crippled his top lieutenant. The heavy blast doors to Sector 4 hissed open. Rex and his 60 enforcers poured into the massive bay, fanning out into a tactical formation. They roared, their subsonic clicks and hisses amplified by their combat suits, intending to paralyze the fragile humans with terror. A human named Bill, a 50-year-old foreman from Houston, Texas, with a thick mustache and a noticeable beer belly, was currently using a massive two-handed torque wrench to tighten a plasma valve. When the Vrox stormed in, Bill didn't scream. He didn't run. He just stopped what he was doing, wiped sweat from his forehead with a greasy rag, and stared at the aliens. "Shut down the machinery!" Rex bellowed through his translator, aiming his rifle directly at Bill's chest. "Kneel Garden dwellers, you will pay the blood price for the insult upon our clan." Slowly the heavy machinery ground to a halt. The deafening noise of the engineering bay faded into an eerie silence. 200 human workers stopped what they were doing. They turned wrenches, blowtorches, and crowbars still in their hands. They didn't look terrified. They looked incredibly annoyed that their shift had been interrupted. "Hey, pal!" Bill called out, his thick Texan drawl cutting through the tension. "You're standing in a hard hat required zone. I'm gonna need you to clear out before OSHA gives me another citation." Rex sneered, exposing rows of razor-sharp teeth. "You dare speak to me, soft thing. I will paint these walls with your fragile—" Rex didn't get to finish his sentence. A heavy, industrial-grade steel rivet, weighing roughly 2 pounds, suddenly flew through the air at a speed exceeding 90 miles per hour. It had been thrown perfectly like a baseball by a 20-year-old apprentice named Hank, who had pitched for his college team in Ohio. The steel rivet struck Rex squarely directly between his upper 2 eyes. The kinetic force was equivalent to being hit by a speeding truck on a low-gravity world. The thick, porous bone of Rex's skull caved in with a sickening crunch. The massive clan leader's eyes rolled back, and he dropped to the metal floor like a felled redwood, entirely unconscious before he even hit the ground. The remaining 59 Vrox enforcers stared in absolute frozen horror at their fallen leader. "All right, boys," Bill shouted, his voice echoing off the cavernous ceiling. "Looks like we're on a Union break, defend the site." What followed was not a battle. It was a brutally efficient, one-sided industrial accident. The humans didn't bother with energy weapons. They relied entirely on their terrifying Deathworld biology and their heavy tools. A mechanic named Gary casually grabbed a 300-pound sheet of ablative hull armor and used it as a riot shield, sprinting forward and bulldozing 3 Vrox enforcers into a bulkhead. The aliens' kinetic rifles fired, but the low-velocity rounds designed to pierce brittle alien carapace merely bruised the humans or lodged harmlessly into their thick, dense muscle tissue. Adrenaline, the terrifying human chemical cocktail, flooded the room. The workers systematically dismantled the alien syndicate. They snapped alien limbs like dry twigs. They threw heavy steel wrenches with the accuracy and force of sniper rounds. They used their caterpillar loaders to pin fleeing enforcers against the walls. It was over in less than 4 minutes, when Winston and his Graxion security team finally arrived, breathless and weapons drawn. They froze at the entrance. The human engineering bay was entirely secured. Not a single human was dead. A few were wrapping bandages around minor lacerations or nursing bruised ribs. The 60 Vrox enforcers, however, were scattered across the floor, groaning in agony, sporting multiple compound fractures, shattered weapons, and deeply bruised egos. Bill the foreman was sitting on a crate, calmly drinking from a plastic water bottle. He looked over at Winston, gesturing vaguely to the pile of incapacitated aliens. "Hey, Chief," Bill said casually. Somebody left a bunch of trash in our sector. You mind getting a cleanup crew down here? We've got a deadline to meet for Bechtel by Thursday, and these guys are tripping hazards." Winston slowly lowered his pulse rifle. His translator didn't even bother activating. He just nodded completely and utterly defeated by the terrifying reality of humanity. The secret was out. Within 24 hours, the footage of the engineering incident leaked to the Galactic Extranet. The Galactic Federation Emergency Council convened, frantically reclassifying Earth from a Class 3 Garden World to a Class 11 Deathworld. But it was too late to draft them. Lockheed Martin, along with dozens of other Earth corporations, immediately leveraged their new reputation. Human contractors doubled their rates. Alien pirates actively avoided shipping lanes protected by human security. Nobody bullied a human ever again. As for Sarah Jenkins, she wasn't fired. David Carmichael personally promoted her to the position of senior site overseer, doubling her salary and granting her full hazard pay. She finally got the corner office with the good ventilation. A week later, she was sitting in the mess hall, reading the exact same Stephen King novel. A massive, heavily armored Krell mercenary walked into the room, looking for a place to sit. He saw Sarah sitting alone at a large table. He looked at her, dented Stanley thermos, visibly swallowed hard, and immediately walked out of the room to eat his lunch in the hallway. Sarah smiled, took a sip of her fresh Colombian roast, and turned the page. Did this story of humanity's hidden strength leave you speechless if you loved watching a quiet engineer turn the tables on a galactic bully and prove that Earthlings are the ultimate apex predators? Smash that like button. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow sci-fi fans and subscribe to the channel for more epic HFY stories, where humans show the galaxy who truly runs the stars.